The sound of my business cards being ripped to shreds echoed across the elegant patio of the Scottsdale Country Club, each tear cutting through the cheerful chatter of 30 women celebrating my sister-in-law's upcoming arrival. Jason stood there with pieces of my carefully designed cards scattered at his feet like confetti, his face twisted with an anger I'd never seen before, while every guest at the baby shower stared in stunned silence. The beautiful desert sunset that had been painting the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and pinks suddenly felt like a spotlight exposing my humiliation for everyone to witness. 5 years later, Jason walked into my Houston office begging for a contract to handle the marketing for his struggling real estate firm. The look on his face when my assistant announced that Mrs. Emma Rodriguez, CEO of Summit Media Group, would see him now was worth every sleepless night I'd endured building my empire from nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of that life-changing baby shower started like any other Saturday in our pristine suburban Phoenix home. I remember sitting at our granite kitchen island, carefully arranging my newly printed business cards in my purse while Jason read the sports section and sipped his coffee. The cards were beautiful, featuring the logo I'd spent weeks perfecting for my freelance digital marketing business. Creative Solutions by Emma, they read in elegant silver lettering against a deep teal background. Each card represented months of dreaming, planning, and quietly building something that was entirely mine. I was 28 years old then, married to Jason for 4 years, and desperately trying to find my place in a world that seemed to have very specific expectations for women like me. Growing up in a traditional Mexican-American family in Phoenix, I'd always been the creative one, the daughter who spent hours designing posters for school events and creating elaborate presentations that made my teachers take notice. My parents had been proud when I graduated with a degree in graphic design from Arizona State University, but that pride had shifted into gentle pressure once I married Jason. Suddenly, my art became a hobby, my ambitions became temporary distractions, and my future became entirely tied to when we would start having children. Jason Martinez had swept me off my feet during my senior year of college with his confidence, his 5-year plan, and his unwavering certainty about our future together. He was handsome in that classic way that made other women glance twice, with dark hair always perfectly styled, and a smile that could charm anyone from his real estate clients to my traditionally minded mother. He spoke about success with the kind of authority that made you believe he could achieve anything he set his mind to, and in those early days, I felt lucky to be chosen as his partner for the journey. But somewhere between our wedding day and that fateful baby shower, his certainty about our future had begun to feel less like partnership and more like dictatorship. Every conversation about my career ambitions was met with gentle redirections toward discussing children. Every client I gained through my freelance work was treated as a temporary distraction from my real purpose. Every late night I spent working on designs was questioned as time that could be better spent on our home, our relationship, our preparation for the family. He was convinced we should start immediately. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were attending a baby shower for his sister Carmen, who had somehow managed to maintain her career as a nurse practitioner throughout her pregnancy, while her husband supported her professional goals. But Jason seemed to view Carmen's situation as an exception rather than an example, always finding reasons why her circumstances were different from ours. She had family nearby to help with childcare, he would say. Her husband made less money, so she had to work. She only worked part-time, so it didn't really count as having a career. That morning, as I organized my business cards with the same care other women might arrange family photos, I felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. I knew Jason disapproved of my growing client base, but I'd been hoping that seeing my success might change his perspective. In the past month alone, I'd landed 3 new clients, including a local bakery that had seen a 40% increase in sales after I redesigned their social media strategy. The work filled me with a sense of purpose and accomplishment that, I'd never experienced in any other area of my life. Jason set down his newspaper and watched me slide the card holder into my purse with the expression he usually reserved for watching me make what he considered poor financial decisions. "You're not seriously planning to network at Carmen's baby shower, are you?" The question caught me off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. "I'm not planning to network," I replied carefully. "But if someone asks what I do, I want to be prepared to answer professionally. Emma, it's a baby shower. People are going to be talking about babies, not business." His tone carried that particular brand of condescension that had become increasingly frequent in our conversations about my work. Besides, most of the women there are stay-at-home moms. They're not going to be interested in hiring a marketing consultant. I felt my cheeks flush with irritation, but I kept my voice level. You'd be surprised how many stay-at-home moms are starting their own businesses these days. The online market has created incredible opportunities for women to build careers around their family schedules. Jason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a tell I'd learned to recognize over our years together. That's different, though. That's women trying to make a little extra money, not building serious careers that take time away from their real responsibilities. Real responsibilities. The phrase hung in the air between us like a challenge. I'd heard variations of it countless times over the past year as my business had grown from occasional freelance projects to a steady stream of clients who relied on my expertise. According to Jason, my real responsibilities were maintaining our home, supporting his career, and preparing for the children we would inevitably have. Everything else was a distraction from what he saw as my true purpose. "What if my business becomes more than just extra money?" I asked, genuinely curious about his response. "What if it becomes successful enough to be my primary career?" The question seemed to genuinely surprise him, as if the possibility had never occurred to him as something worth considering. "Honey, that's not realistic. You're talented, but small businesses like that don't usually turn into real careers. And even if yours did, we've talked about this. When we have kids, everything changes. They need their mother at home, especially in those early years." We'd talked about it, but talking implied a conversation where both parties had input. What we'd actually done was listen to Jason explain his vision for our future, while I offered increasingly weak protests that were dismissed as pre-motherhood nerves. He'd read articles about attachment theory and childhood development. He'd researched the costs of quality childcare, and he'd calculated the financial benefits of having one parent focused entirely on home management. All of his research pointed to the same conclusion. The logical choice was for me to transition from career woman to full-time mother and homemaker. The problem was that none of his research had included asking me what I wanted. I'd spent the past 6 months trying to find ways to communicate my growing passion for my work and my reluctance to give up the independence and fulfillment it provided. But every conversation seemed to end the same way, with Jason patiently explaining why my feelings were understandable, but ultimately impractical. He wasn't cruel about it, which somehow made it worse. His certainty was presented as caring. His dismissal of my ambitions was framed as protection, and his assumption that I would eventually come around to his way of thinking was delivered with the kind of confident smile that had charmed me into falling in love with him. The drive to Carmen's baby shower was quiet, filled with the kind of tension that comes from having a conversation neither person wants to finish. The Scottsdale Country Club was exactly the kind of venue Jason's family favored for their celebrations, with manicured desert landscaping, sweeping views of the mountains, and the sort of understated elegance that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. Carmen had reserved the club's outdoor pavilion, which was decorated in soft yellows and whites with touches of sage green that complemented the natural desert surroundings. As we walked through the club's marble-floored lobby toward the patio, I could see groups of women already gathered around elegant round tables, their conversations creating a pleasant hum of excitement and anticipation. Many of them I recognized from previous family gatherings, Successful women who had navigated the complex balance between career and family in ways that seemed effortless from the outside. There was Dr. Angela Torres, a pediatrician who had somehow managed to maintain her practice while raising 3 children. Maria Santos, who owned a chain of boutique fitness studios throughout Phoenix. Jennifer Walsh, who had built a successful catering company that now employed over 20 people. These were women who had refused to choose between personal fulfillment and family responsibility, who had found ways to honor both their professional ambitions and their roles as mothers and wives. Being around them always made me feel hopeful about my own future, like there were paths forward that Jason's rigid vision couldn't see. Carmen greeted us at the entrance to the patio with the kind of radiant smile that only pregnant women seem to master. Her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. She looked beautiful in a flowing yellow dress that accommodated her changing shape while maintaining the polished style she'd always favored. At 6 months pregnant, she was glowing with health and excitement, her dark hair swept into an elegant updo that showcased the diamond earrings her husband had given her for their anniversary. "Emma, Jason, thank you so much for coming," she said, embracing us both warmly. "Emma, I'm so excited to hear about your business. Mom mentioned you've been getting new clients every week." I felt Jason's hand tighten slightly on my back, a subtle signal that I'd learned to interpret as a warning to keep my responses brief and modest. "It's been going really well," I said, trying to strike the right balance between honesty and the humility he expected. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with some amazing local businesses." "That's wonderful," Carmen continued enthusiastically. "Actually, there are several women here today who might be interested in what you do. Lisa Chen just started a consulting firm, and Dr. Torres has been talking about updating her practice's marketing materials." Before I could respond, Jason interjected with his most charming smile. "That's kind of Carmen, but we're here to celebrate you today, not talk business. Emma can network on her own time." The comment stung, though I tried not to let it show on my face. Carmen's expression flickered with something that might have been confusion or disapproval, but she quickly recovered with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to navigate family dynamics diplomatically. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Let me introduce you to everyone." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We have such a wonderful group here today. The next hour passed pleasantly enough, filled with the typical baby shower activities that seemed designed to celebrate both the coming child and the community of women who would support Carmen through motherhood. We played games that tested our knowledge of baby-related trivia, shared advice and stories about child-rearing, and admired the beautiful gifts that would help prepare Carmen and her husband for their new arrival. I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversations, particularly with the women Carmen had mentioned who were building their own careers while preparing for or already managing family responsibilities. Dr. Torres was indeed looking for someone to help modernize her practice's online presence, and Lisa Chen was interested in discussing how we might collaborate on projects that fell at the intersection of our respective expertise. As the afternoon progressed, I began to relax into the environment, feeling like I was among women who understood the complex balance I was trying to achieve between personal ambition and family expectations. The business cards in my purse felt less like contraband and more like tools for building the kinds of professional relationships that could support both my current goals and my future growth. That sense of belonging and possibility made what happened next feel even more devastating. The incident began innocuously enough, during what was supposed to be the final activity of the shower. Carmen had asked each guest to share one piece of advice for new mothers, creating a circle of wisdom that would be compiled into a keepsake book for her to reference during the challenging early months of parenthood. The responses were thoughtful and varied, ranging from practical tips about sleep schedules and feeding routines to emotional insights about the importance of asking for help and maintaining perspective during difficult moments. When it was my turn to speak, I found myself thinking about the women I'd been talking with throughout the afternoon. Successful professionals who had found ways to maintain their identities and ambitions while embracing motherhood. I think one of the most important things is remembering that becoming a mother doesn't mean giving up everything else that makes you who you are, I said, speaking from my heart rather than calculating how my words might be received. The women here today are proof that you can be an amazing mother while still pursuing your own dreams and goals. The response from most of the group was warm and supportive, with several women nodding in agreement and a few offering additional thoughts about the importance of maintaining individual identity within family relationships. But I could see Jason's expression darkening from across the circle, his jaw clenched in a way that usually preceded one of our more difficult conversations. After the formal advice sharing concluded, the party began to transition into its final phase, with guests preparing to leave and Carmen opening the last few gifts. I was standing near the gift table, talking with Dr. Torres about potential collaboration opportunities, when she asked if I had a business card she could take with her. Of course, I said, reaching into my purse for the card holder I'd so carefully prepared that morning. I'd love to discuss how we might work together. As I pulled out one of my business cards and handed it to Dr. Torres, I noticed Jason approaching from across the patio. His expression was unreadable, but something in his posture made me suddenly nervous about what was about to happen. Emma Rodriguez, Creative Solutions, Dr. Torres read from the card with an approving smile. This is beautifully designed. Did you create this yourself? Thank you, yes, I replied, feeling a familiar surge of pride in my work. I believe your marketing materials should reflect the same level of professionalism and attention to detail that you bring to your medical practice. Absolutely, she agreed. I'll definitely be calling you next week to set up a consultation. That's when Jason reached our small group, his smile bright, but his eyes cold in a way that immediately put me on edge. Dr. Torres, it's so nice to see you again, he said with his typical charm. I hope you're enjoying Carmen's shower. It's been lovely, she replied warmly. And I'm so excited to learn about Emma's business. She was just giving me her card. Jason's gaze shifted to the business card in Dr. Torres's hand, then to the card holder still visible in my open purse, and something in his expression shifted, from controlled displeasure to barely contained fury. Actually, Dr. Torres, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, he said, his voice still pleasant, but with an edge that made my stomach clench with dread. Before I could process what was happening, Jason reached into my purse, pulled out the entire stack of business cards, and began tearing them apart with deliberate, methodical precision. The sound of each card ripping seemed impossibly loud against the background of casual conversation and laughter from other guests, and I watched in frozen horror as pieces of my carefully designed cards fell to the elegant patio like confetti, at a celebration I definitely wasn't invited to. Jason, what are you doing? I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible even to myself. I'm saving you from embarrassing yourself, he replied, his voice now carrying clearly to the growing number of people who had turned to stare at our dramatic tableau. And saving these lovely ladies from being subjected to aggressive sales pitches at a baby shower. Dr. Torres looked shocked, her eyes wide with disbelief as she watched my husband systematically destroy every business card I'd brought. I asked for her card, she said firmly. This is completely inappropriate. With all due respect, Dr. Torres, Jason replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. My wife has gotten a little carried away with this hobby of hers. She doesn't seem to understand appropriate times and places for business discussions. Hobby. The word hit me like a physical blow, reducing months of hard work, late nights, and growing success to something frivolous and temporary. Around us, conversations had stopped entirely as more guests became aware of the scene unfolding near the gift table. I could see Carmen approaching with alarm written across her face, could feel the stares of 30 women who had been celebrating. motherhood and community just moments before. "This isn't a hobby," I said, my voice stronger now as anger began to override my shock and embarrassment. "This is my business, my career, my work." Jason laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive, in a way that made several nearby guests visibly uncomfortable. "Emma, let's be realistic. You've made what, a few $100s? This isn't a career. It's a distraction from the life we're supposed to be building together." The humiliation was complete now, every woman at the party watching as my husband publicly dismissed my professional ambitions and destroyed the physical symbols of my growing business. I could see pity in some of their faces, anger in others, and embarrassment on behalf of everyone who had to witness such a private conflict played out in such a public setting. Carmen finally reached us, her face flushed with a combination of pregnancy hormones and genuine distress at seeing her baby shower transformed into a marital battleground. "Jason, I think maybe you and Emma should take this conversation somewhere private," she said diplomatically, though her eyes were flashing with anger that suggested her private thoughts were far less diplomatic. "There's nothing private about it," Jason replied, brushing the last pieces of my business cards from his hands with theatrical finality. "Emma has been living in a fantasy world, and it's time someone helped her face reality. We're married, we're planning to start a family, and that means putting aside childish dreams about being some kind of business mogul." The silence that followed his words was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of golf carts and lawn maintenance that seemed to emphasize how normal the world remained despite the fact that mine was falling apart. I stood there surrounded by the remnants of my business cards, feeling exposed and humiliated in front of women whose respect I had wanted to earn. Women who were now witnesses to the most degrading moment of my marriage. That's when something inside me shifted, some internal mechanism that had been holding me back, finally snapping under the weight of public humiliation and private disappointment. I looked at Jason's satisfied expression, at the scattered pieces of my work littering the elegant patio, at the faces of successful women who had managed to balance career and family without sacrificing their dignity or their dreams. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent patio. "It is time someone faced reality, but it's not me." I turned to Dr. Torres, who was still holding the one business card that had escaped Jason's destruction, and spoke directly to her while the entire party listened. "That consultation offer stands, Dr. Torres. You can reach me at the email address, on that card, or through my website. I'll be happy to discuss how we can modernize your practice's marketing to better serve your patients and grow your business." Then I looked back at Jason, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in our 4-year marriage. "And you're right that we need to have a conversation about our future. But it's not going to happen here, and it's not going to end the way you think it is." With that, I walked away from the ruins of my business cards, away from my humiliated husband and away from the woman I had been just moments before. I didn't say goodbye to Carmen, didn't collect the purse I'd left by my chair, didn't even look back as I made my way through the country club's marble lobby and out into the Arizona sunshine. I called an Uber from the club's circular driveway, standing in the desert heat while I waited for my ride and processed what had just happened. My phone buzzed with text messages from Carmen and Dr. Torres, but I wasn't ready to respond to sympathy or support. What I needed was space to think, time to plan, and the courage to acknowledge that my marriage had just ended in the most public and humiliating way possible. As my Uber pulled up to take me home to the house I shared with Jason, I realized that the woman who had carefully organized business cards that morning was gone forever. In her place was someone who had been pushed too far, humiliated too completely, and was finally ready to fight for the life she actually wanted rather than the one she was expected to accept. The war for my independence had just begun, and Jason had fired the first shot by destroying my business cards at his sister's baby shower. But as I settled into the back seat of the Uber and watched the Scottsdale Country Club disappear behind me, I knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't be the one to fire the last shot. That honor would belong to me. The drive home from the country club felt like traveling through a different dimension, where everything looked familiar, but nothing felt the same. My Uber driver, a kind older woman named Rosa, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror with concern etched across her weathered face. I must have looked as shattered as I felt, sitting in the back seat of her Toyota Camry while the Phoenix suburbs blurred past my window like a watercolor painting left in the rain. When we pulled into my driveway, I sat frozen for a moment, staring at the house Jason and I had bought 3 years earlier with such optimism and excitement. The 2-story colonial with its perfectly manicured lawn and matching flower boxes suddenly looked like a stage set for a life I no longer wanted to live. The American dream wrapped in stucco and Spanish tile, complete with a 2-car garage and the kind of mortgage that required 2 incomes to maintain comfortably. Rosa waited patiently while I gathered the courage to face whatever came next. "You okay, Misha?" she asked gently, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who had probably comforted countless strangers during difficult moments in their lives. "I will be," I replied, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "Thank you for the ride." Inside the house, the silence felt oppressive in a way it never had before. Our home had always been Jason's vision more than mine, decorated in the neutral tones and contemporary furniture he preferred, with family photos strategically placed to create the impression of domestic happiness. Now those same photos seemed to mock me, frozen moments of a marriage that had apparently been built on fundamentally different expectations about what our future would hold. I walked through our living room, taking inventory of a life I was beginning to realize had never quite felt like mine. The leather sectional sofa Jason had insisted we needed for entertaining, though we rarely had guests. The expensive coffee table that was too delicate for actual coffee cups, selected more for its aesthetic appeal than its functionality. The wall-mounted television that dominated the room because Jason believed a man's home should center around sports and relaxation after his hard days building his real estate empire. My laptop sat on the dining room table where I'd left it the night before, surrounded by client files and design sketches that represented the work Jason had just publicly dismissed as a hobby. I opened the computer and stared at my email inbox, which contained 3 new inquiries from potential clients who had found me through referrals from satisfied customers. Real people with real businesses who valued my expertise enough to pay for my services, despite what my husband might think about the legitimacy of my career. One email was from Sandra Mitchell, a local yoga instructor who wanted to discuss developing an online presence for her growing studio. Another came from Tony Castellanos, who was opening a food truck and needed help with branding and social media strategy. The third was from Rebecca Walsh, a photographer who specialized in family portraits and was looking to expand her client base through better digital marketing. Each inquiry represented not just potential income, but validation that what I was building had value beyond my own need for creative fulfillment. These were entrepreneurs who understood the challenges of building something from nothing, who appreciated the expertise required to navigate the complex world of digital marketing and brand development. They saw me as a professional worthy of their investment, even if my own husband saw me as a woman playing dress-up in the business world. I spent the next hour responding to emails and updating my client project timelines, losing myself in work that felt meaningful and important despite the devastating events of the afternoon. There was something therapeutic about focusing on concrete tasks and deliverable outcomes, about being useful to people who valued my contributions rather than merely tolerated them. My phone had been buzzing intermittently with text messages, most of which I'd been ignoring while I tried to process what had happened at the baby shower. Finally, I decided to face whatever sympathy, criticism, or drama awaited me in those unread messages. Carmen had sent several texts, starting with immediate concern and escalating to barely contained fury on my behalf. "Emma, I am so sorry about what happened today. Jason's behavior was completely unacceptable, and I want you to know that everyone at the shower was appalled by how he treated you. Please call me when you're ready to talk. Her follow-up message was even more direct. I just got off the phone with Mom and she's furious. We all are. What Jason did was cruel and embarrassing, and not just for you. He humiliated our entire family by acting like that at my baby shower. Please don't let his issues make you think any of us don't support your business. Dr. Torres had also reached out, her message professional but warm. Emma, I wanted you to know that your husband's behavior today was completely inappropriate and doesn't reflect on you or your business in any way. I'm still very interested in working with you, and I hope today's incident won't discourage you from pursuing your obvious talents. Please call me next week so we can schedule that consultation. Lisa Chen, Carmen's friend who had been starting her own consulting firm, had sent the longest message. Hi, Emma. We were introduced briefly at the shower before things got so uncomfortable. I wanted to reach out because what happened to you today reminded me of some of the challenges I faced when I was building my business. If you'd like to talk to someone who understands the unique pressures of being an entrepreneur while managing family expectations, I'd be happy to buy you coffee sometime. Your work sounds fascinating, and I think we might have some opportunities to collaborate. Reading these messages of support from women who barely knew me was both comforting and illuminating. In just a few hours, I'd received more professional validation and encouragement from near strangers than I'd gotten from my husband during months of building my business. The contrast was stark and painful, but also clarifying in a way that made my next decisions feel inevitable rather than impulsive. The front door opened just after 6 o'clock, and I heard Jason's footsteps crossing the hardwood floor of our foyer, with the confident stride of someone who expected to be welcomed home rather than confronted about his behavior. He appeared in the dining room doorway, still wearing his country club outfit, his expression carefully arranged into what I recognized as his apologetic face, though something in his posture suggested the apology would come with significant justifications for his actions. Emma, he said, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when he was preparing to explain why his questionable behavior had actually been reasonable under the circumstances. We need to talk about what happened today. I closed my laptop deliberately, giving myself a moment to choose my words carefully. Yes, we do. Jason moved into the room and took the chair across from me, adopting the serious expression hibaoki, typically used during what he called our important conversations. I know you're upset about the business card thing, and I understand why it seemed harsh. But Emma, you have to understand that I was trying to protect you from embarrassing yourself, even more than you already had. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow, though I tried not to let my reaction show on my face. In Jason's version of events, I had embarrassed myself by discussing my business at a social gathering, and his destruction of my business cards had been an act of marital protection rather than public humiliation. Explain to me how I embarrassed myself, I said quietly, genuinely curious about his interpretation of the afternoon's events. Emma, you were networking at a baby shower. You were treating Carmen's celebration like a business opportunity instead of a family gathering. It was inappropriate, and it made people uncomfortable. He leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he'd made an irrefutable point. Dr. Torres asked me for my business card, I replied. She specifically expressed interest in working with me after we had a conversation about her practice's marketing needs. How is responding to a potential client's request embarrassing? Jason's jaw tightened in the way that usually preceded his more condescending explanations. Because you don't understand professional boundaries yet. Real business people don't aggressively promote themselves at social events. They build relationships first, then business opportunities develop naturally over time. The irony was breathtaking. Jason, whose real estate career was built almost entirely on networking at social events, was lecturing me about professional boundaries while defending his decision to publicly destroy my business materials. The man who routinely handed out his real estate cards at dinner parties, community events, and even casual conversations at grocery stores was criticizing me for having a business card available when someone specifically requested it. And you felt that the appropriate response to my alleged boundary violation was to tear up my business cards in front of 30 people. I asked, my voice still calm despite the anger building in my chest. I felt that the appropriate response was to prevent you from making the situation worse, he replied firmly. You were getting carried away, and someone needed to step in before you damaged both our reputations further. Our reputations, as if my professional ambitions were somehow a reflection on his standing in the community, as if my success or failure would be measured primarily by how it affected his image, rather than my own achievements. The possessive assumption underlying his concern was becoming clearer with every word he spoke. Jason, do you actually respect what I'm trying to build with my business? I asked the question I'd been avoiding for months, finally ready to hear his honest answer rather than the diplomatic responses he usually offered. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him calculating how much honesty our relationship could withstand. Emma, I respect your creativity and your talent, but I think you're confusing having a hobby that makes some extra money with having a real career. And I think that confusion is causing you to make choices that could hurt our future together. There it was, finally spoken clearly after months of gentle redirections and diplomatic suggestions. Jason didn't see my business as a career, didn't see my clients as legitimate, didn't see my income as significant, and didn't see my professional ambitions as worthy of the same respect he expected for his own work. In his mind, I was playing at being a businesswoman until I came to my senses and embraced my real role as his wife and the future mother of his children. What kind of choices do you think I'm making that could hurt our future? I asked, though I suspected I already knew his answer. You're spending time and energy on something that's ultimately going to be temporary instead of focusing on building the life we plan together, he said, his voice taking on the patient tone he used when explaining obvious concepts to someone who was being deliberately obtuse. We've talked about starting a family, about me focusing on growing my real estate business while you manage our home and raise our children. This marketing thing is a distraction from those goals. The life we plan together. Another interesting phrase choice that revealed how differently we remembered our conversations about the future. I recalled expressing concerns about giving up my career, asking questions about how we might balance professional and family responsibilities, suggesting alternatives to the traditional division of labor he preferred. But apparently, those concerns and questions had been filed away as temporary resistance to an inevitable outcome rather than legitimate input into our shared decision-making process. When did we decide that I would give up my career to be a stay-at-home mother? I asked. I remember you expressing that preference, but I don't remember agreeing to it. Jason's expression shifted into the frustrated look he got when I failed to acknowledge what he considered settled matters. Emma, we've discussed this extensively. You know that's what makes the most sense financially and logistically. My income is higher and has more growth potential. Quality childcare is expensive and doesn't provide the same benefits as having a parent at home full-time. We both agreed that the traditional approach would be best for our family. I never agreed to that, I said firmly. I listened to your arguments, I acknowledged the financial considerations, but I never agreed to give up my career entirely. I've been hoping we could find a compromise that would allow me to continue working while also starting a family. Compromise, Jason repeated the word like it tasted bitter in his mouth. Emma, some decisions don't lend themselves to compromise. Either you're committed to being a full-time mother, or you're not. Either you prioritize our family, or you prioritize your career. You can't do both effectively. The false binary he was presenting infuriated me, particularly coming from someone whose own mother had successfully balanced a teaching career with raising 2 children. Carmen had managed to maintain her nursing career throughout her pregnancy and was planning to return to work after a reasonable maternity leave. Countless women in our social circle had found ways to honor both their professional ambitions and their family responsibilities. But according to Jason, I was uniquely incapable of achieving that balance. Why can't I do both effectively? I challenged. Other women manage it. Your own sister is managing it. Why am I different? Because other women have different circumstances, he replied, recycling the same arguments he'd used whenever I pointed to successful examples of working mothers. Carmen's husband makes less money, so she has to work. Dr. Torres had her practice established before she had children, so she had systems in place. You're trying to build something new while also starting a family, which means neither would get the attention it deserves. What if I don't want to start a family right now? The question came out before I could stop myself, giving voice to doubts I'd been suppressing for months as Jason's pressure for children had intensified. The silence that followed was deafening. Jason stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally anger as he processed what I'd said. "What do you mean you don't want to start a family?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "We've been married for 4 years. We're financially stable. We have a house with room for children. What are we waiting for? Maybe I want to see what I can build with my business first," I said, the words coming easier now that I'd started speaking honestly about my feelings. Maybe I want to establish myself professionally before I take time off to have children. Maybe I want to prove to myself that I can be successful at something that's entirely mine. "Entirely yours," Jason repeated, his voice heavy with the kind of disappointment usually reserved for major betrayals. "Emma, we're married. Nothing in our lives is entirely yours or entirely mine. We're supposed to be building something together." "Are we?" I asked. "Because it feels like you're building your real estate career while I'm expected to build your domestic support system. How is that building something together?" Jason stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked our backyard with its perfect lawn and carefully maintained landscaping. "I can't believe you're being this selfish," he said, his back still turned to me. "I work 60 hours a week to provide for our future, to give us the security and stability that will allow you to be a full-time mother without financial stress. And instead of being grateful for that sacrifice, you're resentful that I'm not equally enthusiastic about your little hobby business." Little hobby business. The dismissive phrase crystallized everything that was wrong with our relationship, everything that had been building toward this moment for months. Jason saw my work as fundamentally trivial, my income as irrelevant, my professional satisfaction as selfish indulgence that distracted from my real purpose as his wife and future mother of his children. "My little hobby business earned $4,000 last month," I said, turning to face him directly. "My clients depend on my expertise to grow their businesses and reach their customers. The work I do helps real people achieve their entrepreneurial dreams. How is that less valuable than selling houses to people who could probably find them with any decent realtor?" The comparison was deliberately provocative, and I could see Jason's face flush with anger as he processed the implication that his work was no more inherently important than mine. He turned away from the window to face me, his expression harder than I'd ever seen it. "Because my work provides the foundation for everything else we want to achieve," he said, his voice cold and measured. "Because my career has growth potential that could make us genuinely wealthy over the next decade. Because my clients are serious people making major financial decisions, not small business owners playing around with social media." "Small business owners playing around with social media," I repeated, feeling something inside me snap completely. "Do you hear yourself? You're describing the backbone of the American economy like it's some kind of game. You're dismissing every entrepreneur who's trying to build something meaningful as if their work doesn't matter, because it's not happening on the same scale as your real estate deals." "I'm being realistic about the difference between building a career and making some extra money with a creative hobby," Jason shot back. "And I'm trying to help you understand that difference before you waste more time and energy on something that's never going to provide the kind of life we want to live." The kind of life you want to live, I corrected. You've decided what our life should look like, and you've assigned me a role in that vision without asking if it's what I actually want. What you actually want, Jason laughed bitterly. Emma, what you actually want changes every 6 months. 2 years ago, you wanted to get your yoga instructor certification. Last year, you were talking about going back to school for your master's degree. Now it's this marketing business. You cycle through interests and passions like other people change clothes, and you expect me to take each one seriously, as if it's going to be your lifelong calling. The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to feel personal. I had explored different interests and possibilities over the years, trying to find something that felt meaningful and sustainable while also fitting into the life Jason expected us to live together. But he was presenting my search for fulfillment as evidence of flightiness, rather than recognizing it as a natural response to feeling constrained and undervalued in our relationship. Maybe my interests change because I've been trying to find something that would satisfy me while also meeting your approval, I said. Maybe I've been compromising my own instincts to avoid conflicts like this one. Or maybe you're just not ready to accept adult responsibilities, Jason replied. Maybe you're still thinking like a college student who can explore different options indefinitely instead of like a married woman who needs to commit to building a stable life with her husband. Adult responsibilities. The phrase revealed everything about how Jason viewed our relationship dynamic. In his mind, accepting adult responsibilities meant accepting his vision for our future, his timeline for major life decisions, and his assessment of which goals were worthy of pursuit. My resistance to that framework wasn't legitimate disagreement between equal partners, but evidence of immaturity that needed to be corrected through patient guidance and firm boundaries. What if my adult responsibility is to build a career that allows me to contribute financially to our marriage, while also finding personal fulfillment in my work? I asked. What if my adult responsibility is to model for our future children that women can be successful professionals and devoted mothers simultaneously? What if your adult responsibility is to prioritize your family over your ego? Jason countered. What if your adult responsibility is to recognize that not every personal desire needs to be indulged, especially when it conflicts with more important goals? More important goals. His goals, of course, which had somehow become elevated to the status of shared priorities without my conscious agreement. His vision for our family structure, his timeline for children, his definitions of appropriate, professional ambition for a woman in my position. The conversation was revealing the fundamental incompatibility that had been growing beneath the surface of our marriage for months, maybe years. Jason wanted a traditional wife who would support his ambitions while subordinating her own, who would find fulfillment primarily through domestic achievements and child-rearing, who would measure her success by his success rather than seeking independent accomplishment. I wanted a partnership where both of our professional goals mattered, where major decisions were made collaboratively rather than unilaterally, where my contributions to our relationship extended beyond housekeeping and eventual motherhood. I think we want different things from this marriage, I said quietly, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating as I spoke them aloud. Jason stared at me for a long moment, his anger apparently giving way to something that looked like genuine surprise. Emma, we've been together for 6 years. We've built a life together. We've made commitments to each other. You can't just decide you want different things because you're going through some kind of quarter-life crisis. Quarter-life crisis. Another dismissive label for what I was beginning to understand was actually clarity about my own values and priorities. In Jason's framework, any deviation from his long-term plans was evidence of temporary confusion rather than legitimate personal growth or changing circumstances. Maybe what you call a quarter-life crisis is actually me figuring out who I am and what I want from my life, I replied. Maybe it's me recognizing that the person I was when we got married isn't the same person I am now, and the life I thought I wanted isn't the life that would actually make me happy. The life that would actually make you happy, Jason repeated sarcastically. Emma, happiness isn't something you achieve by constantly changing your mind about what you want. Happiness comes from making commitments and honoring them, from building something stable and meaningful with someone you love. I agree, I said. But it also comes from feeling valued and respected by the person you're building that life with. It comes from having your goals and dreams treated as legitimate, rather than dismissed as hobbies or phases. It comes from partnership, rather than one person making all the major decisions while the other person is expected to be grateful for whatever role they're assigned. Jason ran his hands through his hair in frustration, a gesture I'd seen countless times during our more difficult conversations. I don't understand how we got here, he said. 6 months ago, we were talking about starting to try for a baby. We were looking at minivans and discussing preschools. Now you're acting like our entire relationship has been some kind of prison sentence. 6 months ago, you were talking about starting to try for a baby, I corrected. I was expressing concerns about the timing and asking questions about how we would balance career and family responsibilities. But every time I raised those concerns, you dismissed them as temporary nerves that I would get over once we actually started the process. Because that's what they seemed like, Jason said defensively. Every woman I know had similar concerns before having children, and every one of them said that becoming a mother was the most fulfilling thing they'd ever done. I thought you just needed reassurance about how we would handle the practical challenges. What if becoming a mother isn't the most fulfilling thing I could do with my life? I asked. What if I want to have children eventually, but not until I've had the chance to see what I can accomplish professionally? What if I want to be a mother and a successful businesswoman, and I'm not willing to choose between those goals? UI. Question seemed to genuinely confuse Jason, as if I'd asked him to explain a concept from theoretical physics. Emma, you can't have everything. Real life requires making choices and accepting trade-offs. The women who try to do everything end up doing nothing particularly well. Do you believe that about men too? I asked. Do you think male entrepreneurs who become fathers are trying to have everything and end up doing nothing well? Or is that limitation specific to women? Jason's pause before answering told me everything I needed to know about his perspective on gender roles and professional ambition. It's different for men, he said finally. Men are expected to be primary providers, so their career success directly benefits their families. When men work long hours or travel for business, they're fulfilling their responsibility to support their wives and children. And when women work long hours or travel for business, they're being selfish and neglecting their real responsibilities. I finished. That's not what I said, Jason protested, though his tone suggested he knew that was exactly the implication of his words. That's exactly what you said, I replied. You just used different language to make it sound more reasonable. We stared at each other across our dining room table, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had felt secure and promising just hours earlier. The distance between us seemed to be measured in more than just physical space now, an emotional and philosophical gap that was widening with every word we spoke. So what are you saying, Emma? Jason asked, his voice quieter now, but no less tense. Are you saying you want to end our marriage because I want you to be a stay-at-home mother? The question forced me to articulate something I'd been avoiding even in my own thoughts. I'm saying I want to be married to someone who sees me as an equal partner rather than a supporting character in his life story. I want to be with someone who values my professional ambitions and respects my right to make my own choices about motherhood and career. I want a husband who would never humiliate me in public the way you did today, regardless of how frustrated he might be with my decisions. And you don't think I can be that person, Jason said, though it was more of a statement than a question. I considered his question carefully, thinking about the man I'd fallen in love with 6 years earlier and the husband who had torn up my business cards that afternoon. I think you can only be that person if you fundamentally change your beliefs about marriage, gender roles, and what it means to be supportive of your spouse's goals. And I don't think you want to change those beliefs because they serve your vision for our future." Jason was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing the implications of what I'd said. "If I did want to change," he said slowly, "if I tried to be more supportive of your business, would that be enough to save our marriage?" The question revealed how little he understood about the depth of the problem we were facing. He was still thinking in terms of tactical adjustments rather than fundamental shifts in perspective, still assuming that our conflict was about my business rather than about respect, autonomy, and equal partnership. "Jason, the business is just a symptom of the larger issue," I said gently. "The larger issue is that you've never seen me as your equal. You've seen me as someone you need to guide, protect, and ultimately control for my own good. You've made major decisions about our future without my genuine input, and when I've tried to assert my own preferences, you've dismissed them as temporary confusion that you could help me overcome. That's not how I see our relationship," Jason protested. "Then explain to me why you thought it was appropriate to destroy my business cards in front of 30 people instead of having a private conversation about your concerns," I challenged. "Explain to me why you've spent months pressuring me to give up my career without ever seriously considering alternatives that would allow me to continue working. Explain to me why every conversation about our future starts with your assumptions about what we should do rather than questions about what we both want." Jason opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently realizing that any answer he gave would only support my argument about our fundamental dynamic. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that couldn't be taken back. "I love you, Emma," he said finally, his voice carrying a vulnerability I rarely heard from him. "I want to make this work." "I know you do," I replied, feeling sadness rather than anger for the first time since our conversation began. "But love isn't enough if we can't respect each other as equals. And right now, I don't think you're capable of seeing me as anything other than a woman who needs to be managed for her own good." "So that's it?" Jason asked. 6 years together and you're giving up because we disagree about career priorities?" "I'm not giving up," I said firmly. "I'm choosing to prioritize my own well-being and professional growth over a relationship that requires me to diminish myself to maintain harmony. I'm choosing to bet on my own potential rather than accepting limitations that someone else has decided are appropriate for me." Jason stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between disbelief and grudging admiration. "You've really changed," he said quietly. "Yes, I have," I agreed. "And the woman I'm becoming deserves a partner who celebrates that growth rather than trying to constrain it." With that acknowledgement hanging in the air between us, both of us seemed to understand that our marriage was over, even if neither of us was quite ready to say those words out loud. The conversation that had begun with Jason's attempt to justify his behavior at the baby shower had revealed incompatibilities that no amount of compromise or counseling could bridge. I was ready to fight for my independence and my professional ambitions, even if it meant starting over completely. Jason was committed to a vision of marriage and family that required me to subordinate my goals to his, and no amount of discussion was going to change that fundamental difference in our values and expectations. The war for my future had begun that afternoon when Jason tore up my business cards, but this conversation had clarified exactly what I was fighting for and what I was willing to sacrifice to achieve it. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of building a life that belonged entirely to me, one decision at a time, one client at a time, one day at a time. The next morning brought a clarity I hadn't experienced in years, as if the emotional earthquake of the previous day had shifted everything into sharper focus. I woke up alone in our king-sized bed, Jason having spent the night in the guest room after our conversation ended with him storming out to cool off at his favorite sports bar. The house felt different in the early morning light, less like a home and more like a beautiful prison I was finally ready to escape. I made coffee in our pristine kitchen, standing at the granite countertop, while I planned the most important day of my professional life. My laptop sat open beside me, displaying the email from Dr. Torres that had arrived overnight. She had not only confirmed her interest in working with me, but had also forwarded my information to two of her colleagues who were looking for marketing help. 3 potential clients in less than 24 hours, all stemming from the networking Jason had tried to humiliate me for attempting. The irony wasn't lost on me that his public destruction of my business cards had actually generated more interest in my services than any advertising I could have afforded. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor about how it delivers the lessons we need to learn. I spent the morning returning calls and emails, scheduling consultations with Dr. Torres and her colleagues, and following up with the other women from the baby shower who had expressed interest in my services. By noon, I had booked enough work to cover my expenses for the next 2 months, assuming I had expenses that were actually mine to manage. That assumption led me to the most difficult decision I'd been avoiding since Jason and I started having problems. I needed to understand our financial situation completely, not just the carefully curated version Jason presented during our monthly budget discussions. For 4 years, I'd allowed him to manage most of our major financial decisions, trusting that his real estate expertise extended to personal finance management. Now I needed to see the complete picture so I could plan my exit strategy intelligently. Our home office was Jason's domain, organized with the meticulous attention to detail he brought to his real estate transactions. Filing cabinets contained years of tax returns, investment statements, and property documents that painted a picture of financial success that looked impressive on paper. But as I dug deeper into our actual cash flow and monthly obligations, a more complicated story emerged. We were living well beyond our means, maintaining a lifestyle that required both of our incomes to sustain comfortably. The house payment alone consumed nearly 40% of Jason's monthly earnings, and when I added up our car payments, credit card balances, and the personal loan Jason had taken to renovate our kitchen the previous year, our debt-to-income ratio was far higher than any financial advisor would recommend. My freelance income, which Jason dismissed as hobby money, had actually been covering almost all of our discretionary spending for the past 8 months. Dinners out, weekend trips, the gym memberships he insisted we needed, the premium cable package that allowed him to watch every possible sporting event. Without my contribution, Jason would have been living paycheck to paycheck despite his supposedly superior earning potential. The revelation was both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it proved that my work had real financial value, terrifying because it meant that leaving Jason would require me to build enough income to support myself independently while he figured out how to manage his own financial shortfalls. I photographed every relevant document, uploaded everything to a secure cloud storage account, and began creating spreadsheets that would help me understand exactly how much money I needed to earn to maintain the lifestyle I actually wanted, rather than the one Jason had convinced me we needed. The exercise forced me to examine my own values and priorities, separating the things that genuinely mattered to me from the status symbols Jason insisted were necessary for our social standing. Did I need a house with 4 bedrooms when I worked? Alone from home? Did I need a luxury SUV when I rarely drove anywhere except client meetings? Did I need designer furniture and expensive artwork when I spent most of my time focused on building my business, rather than entertaining guests who might be impressed by our material possessions? The answer to all of those questions was a resounding no, which meant that my financial independence was much more achievable than I'd previously believed. I could live comfortably on a fraction of what we were currently spending, especially if I focused on building my business rather than maintaining. The lifestyle infrastructure Jason had convinced me was essential for our happiness and social status. By late afternoon, I had created a comprehensive plan for transitioning from married financial dependence to single entrepreneurial independence. The plan required careful timing, strategic client development, and the kind of focused determination I hadn't needed since college, but it was achievable, especially given the momentum my business was already gaining. Jason returned home that evening with flowers and takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, his standard approach to smoothing over conflicts that had gotten more heated than he intended. He found me in the office, surrounded by financial documents and legal research printouts, working on my laptop with the kind of intense concentration I usually reserved for major client projects. "Emma?" he said softly, setting the flowers on the desk beside my computer. "I brought dinner. I thought we could talk about things more calmly tonight." I looked up from my work, noticing that he'd changed into the casual clothes I'd always found attractive and had clearly spent time arranging his hair in the way he knew I liked. The effort was touching in a way that made what I had to tell him even more difficult. "That's thoughtful," I said, closing my laptop and turning to face him directly. "But I don't think talking is going to change anything fundamental about our situation." Jason's hopeful expression faltered slightly, but he maintained his conciliatory tone. "Emma, I know I handled things badly yesterday. I should have talked to you privately instead of making a scene at Carmen's shower. I was frustrated and I reacted poorly, but that doesn't mean we can't work through this." "You're right that you handled things badly," I agreed. But the scene at the baby shower was just the visible symptom of problems that go much deeper than how we handle disagreements in public. He pulled up the chair across from me, adopting the serious expression that usually preceded his attempts to resolve our conflicts through logical discussion and reasonable compromise. "Okay, let's talk about the deeper problems. Tell me what you need from me to make this work." The question revealed how little he understood about what had shifted, in my perspective, over the past 24 hours. He was still operating from the assumption that our problems could be solved through better communication and mutual accommodation, still believing that I was asking for adjustments to our existing dynamic rather than questioning the fundamental structure of our relationship. "Jason, what I need is to be married to someone who sees me as an equal partner," I said carefully. "Someone who values my professional goals as much as his own, who respects my right to make my own decisions about career and family, and who would never humiliate me in public regardless of how frustrated he might be with my choices." "I can do that," Jason said quickly. "I can be more supportive of your business, more respectful of your decisions. Yesterday was an aberration, not a pattern." "Yesterday was the culmination of a pattern," I corrected gently. "A pattern of you making unilateral decisions about our future, dismissing my concerns as temporary confusion, and treating my professional ambitions as hobbies that I'll eventually outgrow when I embrace my real responsibilities as your wife." Jason was quiet for a moment, and I could see him trying to process my words in a way that would allow for the kind of compromise he was hoping to negotiate. "If I changed those behaviors, if I started treating your business as seriously as my career, would that be enough?" The question broke my heart because I could hear the genuine desire to fix things in his voice, but I also knew that the changes I needed weren't something he could simply decide to implement like a new customer service protocol. They required a fundamental shift in his beliefs about gender, marriage, and what it meant to be a supportive spouse. "Jason, I've spent the day reviewing our finances and planning what it would take for me to support myself independently," I said, deciding that honesty was kinder than false hope. "I've realized that I've been subsidizing a lifestyle that I don't actually want, in service of a vision for our future that doesn't align with my own goals and values." "What does that mean?" he asked, though his expression suggested he was beginning to understand the implications of my research. "It means I'm going to build my business into something substantial, and I'm going to do it as a single woman who doesn't have to negotiate every decision with someone who fundamentally disagrees with my priorities." The words hung between us, like a bridge that couldn't be uncrossed. Jason stared at me with an expression that cycled through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been panic, as he realized that this wasn't a conversation about improving our marriage, but about ending it. "Emma, you can't be serious," he said finally. "We have a life together. We have a house, shared finances, shared friends. You can't just walk away from all of that because we disagree about when to have children." "I'm not walking away because we disagree about when to have children," I replied. I'm walking away because you've never seen me as capable of making my own decisions about my own life. You've been trying to manage me like I'm a project that needs to be optimized for your benefit, rather than a person with my own dreams and ambitions. That's not fair, Jason protested. Everything I've done has been for our benefit, for our future together. I've been trying to build something stable and secure so we could have the kind of life we both want. The kind of life you want, I corrected. You decided what our life should look like and then spent years trying to convince me that your vision was what I wanted too. But I never actually agreed to give up my career to be a stay-at-home mother. I never agreed that your professional success was more important than mine. I never agreed to subordinate my goals to your timeline. Jason ran his hands through his hair in frustration, a gesture that had become increasingly frequent during our difficult conversations. So, what are you saying? That our entire marriage has been a lie? I'm saying that our marriage has been based on assumptions about what I wanted that were never actually confirmed, I replied. You assumed I would eventually embrace the traditional role you preferred for me, and I assumed I could gradually change your mind about the value of my professional ambitions. Neither of those assumptions turned out to be accurate. But we love each other, Jason said, his voice carrying a desperation that made my heart ache for both of us. That has to count for something. We can figure out how to compromise, how to make both of our goals work. Love isn't enough if it's not accompanied by respect, I said gently. And respect isn't something you can decide to feel if you don't. Actually believe your partner is capable of making good decisions about their own life. I do respect you, Jason insisted. I respect your intelligence, your creativity, your talent. I just think you're making choices that will ultimately make you unhappy. And that's exactly the problem, I replied. You think you know better than I do about what will make me happy. You think your assessment of my choices is more accurate than my own experience of what brings me fulfillment and satisfaction. Jason was quiet for a long moment, staring at the financial documents scattered across the desk as if they might contain answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. What about the house? He said finally. What about our friends? Our families? What about the life we've built together? The house is in both of our names, so we'll need to decide whether to sell it or whether one of us wants to buy out the other's equity, I said, grateful that I'd spent the day researching these practical considerations. Our friends will probably take sides, which is unfortunate but inevitable. Our families will have to adjust to the fact that we've discovered we want different things from life. And the life we've built together just gets thrown away? Jason asked, his voice heavy with something between anger and grief. The life we've built together was never as solid as we thought it was, I replied honestly. We were building different versions of the same life, hoping the other person would eventually come around to our perspective. That's not sustainable long term. What if I said I was willing to support your business completely? Jason asked suddenly. What if I said you could pursue your career as aggressively as you want, and we could figure out the family planning later? The offer was everything I'd thought I wanted to hear for months. But now that he'd said it, I realized it wasn't enough to address the fundamental issues between us. Jason, the business is just one manifestation of a larger problem. Even if you supported my career completely, I would still be married to someone who thinks his judgment about my life is more reliable than my own. I don't understand the difference, he said, his frustration evident. The difference is that you're offering to accommodate my choices, rather than truly respecting my right to make them, I explained. You're treating my professional ambitions like a phase you're willing to indulge rather than a legitimate expression of who I am and what I want from life. How is supporting your choices different from respecting your right to make them? Jason asked, genuinely confused. Because supporting my choices implies that you're still the ultimate authority on whether my choices are good ones, I replied. Respecting my right to make them means acknowledging that I'm the ultimate authority on my own life, even if you disagree with the decisions I make. The distinction seemed to genuinely puzzle Jason, which confirmed my growing understanding that we operated from fundamentally different assumptions about autonomy, authority, and what it meant to be in partnership with another person. In his framework, love meant protecting your partner from their own poor judgment. In mine, love meant trusting your partner to know what was best for their own life. "I think I need some time to process all of this," Jason said finally. "This feels like it's happening very fast." "It's been happening for months," I replied. "Yesterday just forced us to acknowledge what we'd both been avoiding." "So what happens now?" he asked. "Do you want me to move out? Do you want to separate officially?" "I think we both need space to think clearly about what we want," I said. "I'm going to continue building my business and exploring what my life could look like if I prioritize my own goals. You should think about whether you're willing and able to be the kind of partner I need, or whether you'd be happier with someone who shares your vision for traditional marriage and family structure." "And if I decide I can change?" Jason asked. "If I figure out how to be the partner you need? Then we can have a conversation about whether the damage to our relationship can be repaired," I replied honestly. "But Jason, I need you to understand that I'm not going to put my life on hold while you figure that out. I'm going to move forward with my plans regardless of what you decide." The finality in my voice seemed to register with him in a way that our previous conversations hadn't. For the first time since we'd started having problems, he seemed to understand that I was serious about prioritizing my own well-being over our relationship, that I was willing to sacrifice our marriage to protect my own growth and independence. "I never thought it would come to this," he said quietly. "Neither did I admitted. But sometimes relationships reveal incompatibilities that can't be resolved through compromise or accommodation." Jason gathered the takeout containers he'd brought home, apparently having lost his appetite for both dinner and the conversation we'd been having. "I'm going to stay at my brother's place for a few days," he said. "Give us both some space to think." "I think that's a good idea," I agreed, though I already knew that no amount of thinking was going to change the fundamental differences in our values and expectations. After Jason left, I sat in our office surrounded by the financial documents that represented both the life we'd built together and the life I was preparing to build alone. The silence in the house felt different now, less lonely and more peaceful, as if the tension that had been building for months had finally been released. I opened my laptop and began drafting emails to potential clients, responding to the inquiries that had come in throughout the day and planning the next phase of my business development. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based entirely on what I wanted rather than what someone else thought was appropriate for me. The first major decision was whether to keep operating from our home office or find a dedicated workspace that would allow me to separate my professional life from the personal chaos of ending my marriage. The home office was perfectly functional and cost-effective, but it was also filled with reminders of the life I was leaving behind and the compromises I was no longer willing to make. I spent the evening researching co-working spaces and small office rentals in Phoenix, looking for something that would allow me to project the kind of professional image that serious clients expected while also providing the kind of environment that would inspire my best work. By midnight, I had scheduled tours of 3 different spaces for the following week. The second major decision was whether to continue operating as Creative Solutions by Emma or rebrand my business with something that reflected the larger ambitions I was finally allowing myself to pursue. The current name had served me well during my freelance phase, but it felt small and modest in a way that no longer matched my vision for what I wanted to build. I played with different possibilities, looking for something that captured both my commitment to helping businesses grow and my own growth as an entrepreneur. Summit Digital Marketing felt strong and aspirational, suggesting both achievement and ongoing progress toward higher goals. It also had the kind of professional gravitas that would appeal to the larger clients I wanted to attract as I scaled my operations. The third major decision was whether to continue working alone or begin building a team that could handle the increased client load I was confident I could generate. Working alone had been necessary during the early phases of my business, but it was also limiting my growth potential and preventing me from taking on the kinds of complex projects that offered the highest profit margins. I made a list of the skills and capabilities I would need to add to offer comprehensive digital marketing services to growing businesses: social media management, content creation, website development, email marketing automation, search engine optimization, paid advertising management. Each of these areas required specialized expertise that I could either develop myself or hire from other professionals who were looking for consistent contract work. By the time I went to bed that night, I had the framework for a business plan that could generate enough income to support the lifestyle I actually wanted, while also providing opportunities for professional growth and creative fulfillment. It was ambitious but achievable, especially given the momentum I'd already built and the referral network that was beginning to develop. More importantly, it was entirely mine. Every decision, every risk, every potential reward belonged to me, rather than being filtered through someone else's assessment of what was appropriate or realistic for a woman in my situation. The next morning brought a call from Lisa Chen, Carmen's friend who had been starting her own consulting firm when we met at the baby shower. She wanted to meet for coffee to discuss potential collaboration opportunities and to offer support during what she correctly assumed was a difficult time in my personal life. We met at a trendy cafe in downtown Phoenix, one of those carefully curated spaces that attracted entrepreneurs and creative professionals looking for an environment that felt both productive and inspiring. Lisa was exactly the kind of woman I hoped to become: professionally successful and personally confident, someone who had built something meaningful without sacrificing her sense of self in the process. "I heard through the grapevine that you and Jason are having problems," she said after we'd ordered our drinks and found a quiet table near the window. "I wanted you to know that what he did at Carmen's shower was completely unacceptable, and it doesn't reflect on you or your business in any way." "Thank you," I said, grateful for the direct acknowledgement of how inappropriate Jason's behavior had been. It's been a difficult few days, but it's also been clarifying in ways I didn't expect. "Difficult situations often are," Lisa agreed. "When my marriage ended 3 years ago, it was devastating at the time, but ultimately, the best thing that ever happened to my career. Sometimes we need to lose the life we thought we wanted to discover the life we actually want." "How did you know your marriage was over?" I asked, curious about her experience and whether it paralleled my own situation. "When I realized I was making myself smaller to avoid conflicts with my husband about my professional ambitions," she replied without hesitation. "When I understood that I was dimming my own light to make him more comfortable with his relative lack of ambition." The parallel was so exact that I felt like she was describing my own experience. "That's exactly what I've been doing," I admitted. "Trying to manage Jason's discomfort with my success, instead of focusing on building the kind of business I actually want to create." "It's a common trap for women who are married to men with traditional expectations about gender roles," Lisa said. "We're taught that being supportive means being subordinate, that being a good wife means making our husbands feel like the primary breadwinners and decision-makers, even when we're equally capable of both roles." "How do you build a business while going through a divorce?" I asked, thinking about the practical challenges of managing both major life transitions simultaneously. "Very carefully and with a lot of support from other women who understand what you're going through," Lisa replied with a smile. "It's actually easier than you might think because divorce forces you to take your financial independence seriously in a way that marriage often doesn't." "What do you mean?" "When you're married, there's always the safety net of your spouse's income, even if you don't think of it that way consciously," she explained. "When you're divorced, your business isn't just a creative outlet or a way to make extra money, it's your lifeline. That clarity of purpose can be incredibly motivating." Lisa was right about the motivating power of necessity. Even though my business had been growing steadily for months, I'd still been thinking of it as supplemental income rather than my primary career. Now that I was facing the prospect of supporting myself entirely through my own work, every conversation felt more urgent, and every business decision carried more weight. "I actually have a proposition for you," Lisa continued. "I've been getting requests for comprehensive business development packages that include both strategic consulting and marketing implementation. I can handle the strategic planning and operational optimization, but I need a reliable partner for the marketing side." The opportunity was exactly what I needed to accelerate my business growth while learning from someone who had successfully navigated the transition from married entrepreneur to independent business owner. Working with Lisa would also provide the kind of professional relationship that could serve as a model for the partnerships I wanted to build as I expanded my own operations. "What kind of projects are you thinking about?" I asked, already interested, but wanting to understand the scope and requirements. "Small to medium-sized businesses that are ready to scale but don't have the internal expertise to manage the growth process effectively," Lisa explained. "Restaurant groups that want to expand to new locations, retail stores that are moving into e-commerce, service providers who need to systematize their operations to handle larger client loads. Those are exactly the kinds of clients I want to work with," I said, feeling excitement about professional possibilities for the first time in months. "Businesses that are past the startup phase but not yet large enough to have internal marketing departments." "Perfect," Lisa said. "I have 3 potential projects lined up for next month, and I've been hoping to find the right marketing partner before I commit to taking them on." We spent the next hour discussing the details of potential collaboration, including how we would structure our partnership, divide responsibilities, and share profits from joint projects. By the time we finished our coffee, we had outlined an arrangement that would provide me with immediate access to higher-value clients, while giving Lisa the marketing expertise she needed to offer comprehensive business development services. More importantly, I had found a professional mentor and potential friend who understood the challenges I was facing and was willing to provide both practical support and strategic guidance as I built my independent business. The isolation I'd been feeling as the only entrepreneur in my social circle was beginning to lift, replaced by the possibility of being part of a community of women who were building meaningful careers on their own terms. The conversation with Lisa marked a turning point in my perspective on the dissolution of my marriage. Instead of viewing the end of my relationship with Jason as a loss that would require years to recover from, I was beginning to see it as an opportunity to build the kind of life I'd always wanted, but had been too afraid or too accommodating to pursue. That afternoon, I toured the first of the office spaces I'd identified as potential homes for my expanding business. The space was in a converted warehouse in downtown Phoenix, part of a creative district that attracted artists, designers, and small business owners who valued character over corporate polish. My potential office had exposed brick walls, large windows that filled the space with natural light, and enough room for the team I was beginning to envision hiring over the next year. Standing in that empty office, imagining it filled with the equipment and energy of a thriving marketing agency, I felt more excited about my future than I had since college. The vision was ambitious but achievable, especially with the kind of focus and determination that comes from knowing you're building something entirely for yourself. The woman who had carefully arranged business cards in her purse just 3 days earlier was already becoming someone I barely recognized, someone who was ready to take risks and make investments in her own potential rather than waiting for permission or approval from anyone else. The transformation was just beginning, but I could already feel the person I was becoming, and she was everything I'd always hoped I could be. 6 months after signing the lease on my downtown Phoenix office, Summit Digital Marketing had grown from a one-woman freelance operation into a thriving agency with 4 full-time employees and a client roster that included some of the most innovative businesses in the Southwest. The exposed brick walls I'd fallen in love with during that first tour now displayed framed case studies showcasing the dramatic growth we'd achieved for our clients, and the large windows that had seemed so full of possibility were now framed. by the kind of modern blinds that serious businesses use to control lighting during important presentations. My divorce from Jason had been finalized 2 months earlier, a surprisingly amicable process once we both accepted that our marriage had run its course. He'd kept the house after buying out my equity, providing me with enough capital to invest seriously in my business expansion without taking on debt that would constrain my growth options. The financial independence I'd once seen as a distant goal had become my daily reality, built on client relationships that valued my expertise and paid accordingly. The partnership with Lisa Chen had exceeded both of our expectations, generating over $200,000 in combined revenue during our first 6 months of collaboration. Our joint approach to business development, combining her strategic consulting with my marketing implementation, had proven irresistible to growing companies that needed comprehensive support, but weren't ready to hire internal departments for each specialized function. Our latest project was exactly the kind of challenge that made me grateful I'd bet on my own potential, rather than accepting the limitations others had tried to impose on my ambitions. Southwestern Solar Solutions was a renewable energy company that had grown from a 2-person startup to a regional powerhouse in just 3 years. But their marketing efforts hadn't evolved beyond the founder's personal networking and word-of-mouth referrals. The company's CEO, Maria Santos, was the kind of visionary entrepreneur I loved working with. She'd identified a massive opportunity in residential solar installation, built a team of expert technicians and project managers, and established relationships with suppliers and financing companies that allowed her to offer competitive packages to homeowners throughout Arizona and New Mexico. But despite having superior technology and customer service, Southwestern Solar was losing market share to competitors with inferior products but superior marketing strategies. "We're the best-kept secret in the solar industry," Maria had explained during our initial consultation. "Our customers love us. Our projects always come in on time and under budget, and our installations consistently outperform our competitors' systems. But we're terrible at telling that story to potential customers who don't already know about us." The challenge was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes project that required every skill I'd developed over the past year of intensive business building. Southwestern Solar needed a complete marketing overhaul, from brand messaging and visual identity to digital strategy and sales funnel optimization. The project would generate more revenue for Summit Digital Marketing than I'd earned during my entire first year in business, but more importantly, it would establish our reputation as an agency capable of handling sophisticated challenges for serious companies. I'd assembled a specialized team for the Southwestern Solar project, bringing together the best freelance talent I'd worked with during my agency's growth phase. Ashley Johnson, a brand strategist I'd met through the local entrepreneurs network, was developing messaging frameworks that would differentiate Southwestern Solar from commodity competitors. Kevin Williams, a web developer whose technical skills matched his strategic thinking, was building a sophisticated digital platform that would guide potential customers from initial interest to signed contracts. Jennifer Davis, a graphic designer whose aesthetic sense perfectly balanced professionalism with approachability, was creating visual assets that would work across everything from business cards to billboard advertisements. Working with a team of specialists rather than trying to handle every aspect of client work myself had been one of the most important transitions in my business development. During my freelance phase, I'd prided myself on being a generalist who could handle any marketing challenge a small business might face. But as my client base grew and my projects became more complex, I'd realized that trying to be everything to everyone was actually limiting my potential to create extraordinary results for the clients who mattered most. The Southwestern Solar project team met every Tuesday morning in my conference room, a space I'd designed to inspire both creativity and confidence during high-stakes client presentations. The room featured a wall-mounted television for digital presentations, a whiteboard that covered an entire wall for collaborative brainstorming, and a conference table large enough to accommodate both my core team and visiting clients without feeling cramped or impersonal. This particular Tuesday morning's meeting was focused on finalizing our strategy presentation for Maria and her executive team. We'd spent 6 weeks researching the solar industry, analyzing competitor messaging, surveying potential customers, and developing creative concepts that would position Southwestern Solar as the premium choice for homeowners who valued quality and reliability over low prices. The messaging hierarchy is working beautifully, Ashley reported as she walked through the brand positioning framework we developed. Peace of mind is the primary emotional driver, supported by proven performance and local expertise. The rational benefits support the emotional appeal without overwhelming the core message. Kevin nodded his agreement as he pulled up wireframes for the new website design. The user experience flow guides visitors from general interest to specific solutions seamlessly. We're capturing leads at multiple touchpoints without being pushy, and the educational content establishes authority while addressing common objections before they arise. Jennifer added visual mock-ups to the presentation, showing how the brand, messaging, and user experience would translate into compelling graphics across digital and print applications. The color palette and typography choices reinforce the premium positioning while maintaining accessibility and warmth. This doesn't look like a commodity service, but it also doesn't feel intimidating or overly corporate. Watching my team present work that exceeded anything I could have created alone, I felt the kind of professional satisfaction that had been missing from my marriage to Jason. These were collaborative relationships built on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence, where everyone's expertise was valued and everyone's contributions made the final product better than any individual effort could achieve. The presentation to Southwestern Solar's executive team was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, and I spent Wednesday evening reviewing every detail of our proposal to ensure that nothing had been overlooked or underexplained. The contract value was significant enough to fund my next 2 hires and establish Summit Digital Marketing as a serious player in the regional business development market, but I was more excited about the creative challenge than the financial opportunity. Thursday morning brought an unexpected call from Dr. Torres, the pediatrician who had been one of my first clients after the baby shower incident that ended my marriage. Her practice had grown substantially since we'd implemented the marketing strategies I'd developed for her, and she was calling to refer a colleague who needed similar services. "Emma, I hope you have time to take on another medical practice," Dr. Torres said after we'd exchanged pleasantries about her continued business growth. Dr. Michael Harrison just opened a concierge medicine practice in Scottsdale, and he's looking for someone who understands how to market professional services to affluent clients without appearing desperate or unprofessional. The referral was gratifying both professionally and personally. Dr. Torres had become more than just a client over the past year, evolving into a genuine advocate for my business who understood the value I provided and was willing to stake her own reputation on recommendations to her colleagues. That kind of relationship couldn't be purchased through advertising or networking events. It had to be earned through consistent delivery of exceptional results. "I'd love to learn more about his practice and his marketing goals," I replied, already mentally shifting my schedule to accommodate a consultation. "Is he looking for a complete marketing strategy or specific tactical support?" "Complete strategy, I think," Dr. Torres said. "He's brilliant with patients but completely lost when it comes to business development. His target clients are successful professionals who value personalized service and convenience, but he has no idea how to reach them effectively." Concierge medicine was an emerging market segment that perfectly matched Summit Digital Marketing's expertise in sophisticated service marketing. The challenge would be developing messaging and outreach strategies that appealed to busy executives and entrepreneurs without appearing to target them solely based on their wealth. The most successful concierge medicine practices built relationships with clients who valued time and attention more than cost savings, which required marketing approaches that emphasized quality and convenience rather than competitive pricing. I scheduled a consultation with Dr. Harrison for the following week, adding another high-value prospect to a pipeline that was growing faster than I dared to hope when I first started building my independent business. The momentum was becoming self-sustaining, with satisfied clients generating referrals that led to larger projects that enhanced my reputation and attracted even more sophisticated opportunities. The Southwestern Solar presentation went exactly as I'd hoped, with Maria and her team immediately grasping how our integrated approach would address their growth challenges while positioning them for long-term market leadership. The creative concepts resonated with their vision for the company's future, the strategic recommendations aligned with their operational capabilities, and the timeline we'd proposed would allow them to launch their new marketing initiatives during the peak season for solar installations. "This is exactly what we needed," Maria said as we concluded the presentation. "You've taken everything we do well and figured out how to communicate it to customers who don't already know about us. The brand positioning feels authentic to who we are while also being aspirational enough to support premium pricing." Her business partner, David Chen, was equally enthusiastic about the digital strategy components. "The website functionality will streamline our sales process significantly. Instead of spending hours explaining our services and differentiating ourselves from competitors, we can focus on understanding each customer's specific needs and designing systems that meet their requirements." The Southwestern Solar contract was signed that afternoon, officially launching the largest project in Summit Digital Marketing's brief but rapidly expanding history. The success felt even more significant because it represented validation of the business model I'd been developing, proving that my combination of strategic thinking and creative execution could generate substantial value for serious companies with ambitious growth goals. That evening, I celebrated by taking my team to dinner at one of Phoenix's best restaurants, a celebration that felt entirely different from the social obligations that had characterized my married life. This was a gathering of professionals who had worked together to create something meaningful, people who respected each other's expertise and enjoyed each other's company without any underlying agenda or hidden resentments. Ashley raised her wine glass in a toast that captured exactly how I was feeling about the day's success. To Summit Digital Marketing, and to proving that small agencies can compete with anyone when they focus on delivering exceptional results, rather than trying to be everything to everyone. The toast was followed by a conversation about our plans for the agency's continued growth, including the additional hires we could now afford and the types of clients we wanted to target as we built our reputation in the regional market. Everyone at the table understood that the Southwestern Solar success was just the beginning of what we could accomplish together, and the excitement about future possibilities was infectious. Kevin suggested that we should consider expanding our service offerings to include comprehensive digital transformation consulting, helping traditional businesses adapt to changing customer expectations and technological capabilities. Jennifer proposed developing a specialized practice focused on visual brand development for professional services firms, an area where her design expertise could command premium rates while serving clients who valued sophisticated creative work. The ideas flowing around our dinner table represented the kind of collaborative strategic thinking that I'd always imagined business partnerships could involve, but had never experienced during my marriage to Jason. These were people who saw my success as connected to their own success, who wanted to build something larger than any of us could create individually, and who respected each other's judgment enough to engage in genuine strategic discussion rather than polite agreement or diplomatic conflict avoidance. By the time we finished dinner, we had outlined an expansion plan that would allow Summit Digital Marketing to evolve from a project-based agency into a comprehensive business development consultancy. The vision was ambitious but grounded in the capabilities and relationships we'd already established, building on proven success rather than hoping for dramatic pivots or lucky breaks. The following week brought the consultation with Dr. Harrison, the concierge medicine physician Dr. Torres had referred. His Scottsdale office was exactly what I'd expected from someone targeting affluent professionals, elegantly appointed but not ostentatious. with the kind of attention to detail that suggested quality without appearing to waste money on unnecessary luxury. Dr. Harrison himself was in his early 40s, with the confident bearing of someone who had achieved significant success in his medical career but was genuinely uncertain about how to translate that expertise into entrepreneurial success. He'd left a prestigious position with a large medical group to start his concierge practice, betting his financial security on his ability to build relationships with patients who would value personalized attention enough to pay premium rates for access to his services. "I know I can provide better medical care than anyone in this market," he explained as we discussed his business goals and challenges. "I have time to really listen to my patients. I can coordinate their care across multiple specialists, and I can be available when they need me rather than making them wait weeks for appointments. But I have no idea how to communicate those benefits to potential patients who don't already understand what concierge medicine offers." The marketing challenge was both sophisticated and straightforward. Dr. Harrison needed to reach successful professionals who were frustrated with traditional medical care but didn't know that better alternatives existed. His ideal patients were people who valued time and convenience highly enough to pay for premium service, but who weren't necessarily looking for medical care that advertised itself as exclusive or elitist. The key is positioning concierge medicine as a productivity tool rather than a luxury service, I explained, as we discussed potential messaging strategies. Your ideal patients aren't people who want to show off their wealth. They're people who want to optimize their health management, so they can focus on the things that matter most to them. Dr. Harrison's face lit up with recognition as I described the positioning approach. Exactly. These are people who understand the value of expertise and efficiency. They hire financial advisors, personal trainers, and executive assistants because they know that specialized help allows them to achieve better results with less time investment. The consultation evolved into a strategic planning session that lasted over 2 hours, as we explored how to adapt the business development approaches I'd used for other professional services firms to the unique challenges of concierge medicine marketing. By the time we finished, Dr. Harrison had committed to a comprehensive 6-month engagement that would generate significant revenue for Summit Digital Marketing while establishing our expertise in healthcare marketing. The success with Dr. Harrison led to introductions to other physicians who were considering concierge medicine transitions, creating opportunities for Summit Digital Marketing to develop specialized expertise in a growing market segment. Within 6 weeks, we had signed contracts with 3 additional medical practices, each requiring customized approaches to patient acquisition and retention, but all benefiting from the strategic frameworks we'd developed for Dr. Harrison. Medical practice specialization also attracted attention from Lisa Chen, who was seeing similar demand for comprehensive business development support among healthcare professionals. We began collaborating on projects that combined her operational consulting with my marketing expertise, creating service packages that addressed both the strategic and tactical challenges facing physicians who were building independent practices. Healthcare is becoming one of the most entrepreneurial industries in the economy, Lisa observed during one of our regular strategy meetings. These doctors are brilliant clinicians, but they need the same kind of business development support that any other entrepreneur requires to build sustainable, profitable enterprises. The observation led to discussions about potentially formalizing our collaboration into a more structured partnership, combining Summit Digital Marketing and Lisa's consulting firm into a comprehensive business development company that could serve growing enterprises across multiple industries. The idea was intriguing both strategically and personally, offering opportunities for larger projects and more sophisticated client relationships while maintaining the collaborative culture that had made both of our businesses successful. As Summit Digital Marketing approached its first anniversary, I found myself reflecting on the dramatic transformation that had occurred since Jason destroyed my business cards at Carmen's baby shower. The woman who had once apologized for discussing her work at social events was now leading strategy meetings with CEOs and designing marketing campaigns that generated millions of dollars in revenue for her clients. More importantly, I had built something that belonged entirely to me, a business that reflected my values and ambitions without requiring approval or accommodation from anyone else. Every client relationship, every team member, every strategic decision was made based on my own judgment and priorities, rather than filtered through someone else's assessment of what was appropriate for a woman in my situation. The financial independence I'd achieved was gratifying, but the professional respect and creative fulfillment were even more valuable. I was working with smart, ambitious people who valued my expertise and trusted my recommendations. I was solving complex problems that required both strategic thinking and creative execution. I was building something that would continue growing and evolving long after any individual project was completed. The anniversary also marked another significant milestone. I'd been invited to speak at the Southwest Regional Marketing Conference, delivering a presentation about sustainable growth, strategies for service-based businesses. The speaking engagement represented the kind of industry recognition that established credibility and attracted opportunities that couldn't be purchased through advertising or networking efforts. Standing on that conference stage, looking out at an audience of marketing professionals and business owners who had come to learn from my experience, I felt the full impact of the journey I'd taken from humiliated wife to respected entrepreneur. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been entirely worth the risks and sacrifices required to achieve it. The conference presentation led to consulting inquiries from businesses throughout the Southwest, expanding Summit Digital Marketing's potential market beyond Phoenix and positioning us for regional, rather than purely local growth. Several attendees approached me after the presentation to discuss potential partnerships or collaboration opportunities, including representatives from larger agencies who were interested in referring specialized projects they couldn't handle internally. One conversation was particularly intriguing. Marcus Rivera, the managing partner of a Denver-based business development firm, was exploring expansion into the Southwest market and was looking for established agencies that could handle the marketing components of comprehensive client engagements. His firm specialized in operational consulting and financial restructuring, but they needed reliable partners for brand development and marketing implementation. Your presentation convinced me that Summit Digital Marketing has exactly the combination of strategic sophistication and execution capability that our clients need, Marcus explained as we discussed potential collaboration. We're working with companies that are ready to scale rapidly, but they need comprehensive support across multiple business functions to manage that growth effectively. The partnership opportunity represented a potential pathway to much larger projects and more substantial revenue, but it also required careful consideration of how such growth would affect the culture and capabilities that had made Summit Digital Marketing successful. I was interested in exploring the possibilities, but I wanted to ensure that any expansion preserved the collaborative relationships and quality standards that had become defining characteristics of my business. The conversation with Marcus led to a series of discussions about Summit Digital Marketing's future direction and growth strategy. Should we focus on becoming the dominant marketing agency in Phoenix, serving clients across multiple industries, but maintaining our local market? Focus? Should we specialize more deeply in specific industries like healthcare or renewable energy, building expertise that could attract clients from broader geographic markets? Should we pursue partnerships with firms like Marcus's that could provide access to larger clients but might require changes to our service delivery model? The questions were exactly the kind of strategic challenges I dreamed of facing when I first started building my independent business. They represented choices between good options rather than desperate attempts to find any viable path forward. The abundance of possibilities was both exciting and slightly overwhelming, a reminder of how far I'd traveled from the woman who had once worried about whether discussing her work at social events was appropriate. As I considered these growth opportunities, I realized that the most important factor in any decision would be preserving the autonomy and creative fulfillment that had motivated me to build Summit Digital Marketing in the first place. Financial success was gratifying, but it was ultimately just a means to the end of being able to work with interesting people on meaningful projects without compromising my own values or accepting limitations imposed by others. The business I'd built was more than just a source of income or professional validation. It was proof that I could succeed on my own terms. Evidence that the capabilities Jason had dismissed as hobbies were actually valuable skills that serious people were willing to pay serious money to access. Every client relationship, every successful project, every strategic decision validated my choice to prioritize my own potential over the security and social approval that traditional marriage had offered. Summit Digital Marketing had become the foundation for a life that was entirely my own, built on relationships and achievements that belonged to me rather than being shared with or subordinated to someone else's vision for our joint future. The independence was both liberating and empowering, creating possibilities that extended far beyond business success into every aspect of how I wanted to live and work and contribute to the world around me. 2 years after Summit Digital Marketing had established itself as one of the premier business development agencies in the Southwest, I received a phone call that would bring my past and present into perfect collision. My assistant, Rebecca, buzzed through on the intercom with the careful tone she used when she wasn't sure how I would react to whoever was on the line. "Emma, there's a Jason Martinez calling about potentially hiring us for a marketing consultation. He says he owns a real estate company and was referred by someone who saw your conference presentation last month. Should I schedule him for a preliminary meeting?" The name hit me like ice water, though I managed to keep my voice steady as I responded. Jason Martinez, who had once dismissed my business as a hobby that distracted from my real responsibilities, was now calling to hire the very expertise he had publicly humiliated me for attempting to develop. The man who had torn up my business cards to save me from embarrassing myself was now desperate enough to seek help from the woman whose professional credibility he had tried to destroy. "Schedule him for Thursday afternoon," I said, curiosity overriding any lingering resentment about our past relationship. "Treat it like any other initial consultation." The 3 days between that phone call and Jason's scheduled appointment gave me time to research his current business situation. What I discovered painted a picture of systematic business decline. Martinez Real Estate Solutions had started strong after our divorce, but the real estate market had evolved rapidly during the digital transformation, and Jason's traditional approach had become increasingly ineffective. His online presence was practically non-existent, with a basic website that looked like it had been designed a decade earlier. His marketing materials still relied on newspaper advertisements and direct mail campaigns that were expensive and increasingly ignored by tech-savvy professionals. Public records showed outstanding judgments from vendors, client complaints about communication breakdowns, and foreclosure proceedings on his expensive Scottsdale office space. Thursday afternoon arrived, and I watched through my office window as Jason parked an aging Toyota Camry in our visitor parking area. The car was a significant downgrade from the luxury SUV he'd driven during our marriage. His appearance had changed as well. He looked thinner and more stressed, wearing a business suit that was well-maintained but not recently purchased. When Rebecca escorted him into my conference room, I was struck by how diminished he seemed. The confident, authoritative presence that had once dominated every room had been replaced by something tentative and uncertain. He looked like a man who was trying to project competence while privately doubting his ability to solve his own problems. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying surprise and something that might have been relief. "I wasn't sure it was really you when I saw the name of the agency. You look successful." "Thank you," I replied, gesturing for him to take a seat across from my custom conference table overlooking downtown Phoenix. "I understand you're looking for marketing support for your real estate business. Tell me about the challenges you're facing." The professional tone seemed to put him slightly at ease, though I could see him struggling to process the reality of asking his former wife for business advice. This was the woman he had once told needed to focus on supporting his career rather than pursuing her own professional ambitions. "The market has changed a lot," Jason began carefully. "Clients expect different things now, and traditional approaches aren't generating the same results." "What traditional approaches have you been using?" I asked, taking notes like I would for any potential client. "Print advertising, direct mail campaigns, networking events," he listed, describing exactly the kind of outdated tactics that modern businesses had abandoned years earlier. "I've got a website, but it doesn't generate much traffic." "When was your website last updated?" "Maybe 3 years ago," he admitted reluctantly. "I hired someone, but I haven't been happy with the results." The consultation revealed the depth of his strategic challenges. His ideal clients were successful professionals who appreciated personalized service, but his marketing attracted price-sensitive customers who viewed real estate services as commodities. There was a complete disconnect between his service model and his marketing strategy. By the time we finished, I had outlined a comprehensive business transformation addressing not only his marketing deficiencies, but also operational issues preventing him from delivering quality service. When I presented the pricing and scope of work, I could see him calculating whether he could afford the investment required to save his failing business. "I'll need to review my finances and get back to you," Jason said finally, though we both knew his options were limited. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the conference room door. "Emma, I know this is awkward, given our history. I want you to know that I recognize how wrong I was about your capabilities and your business potential." "I appreciate you saying that, Jason," I replied. "But I hope you understand that I've moved far beyond needing validation from anyone about the legitimacy of my career." 3 days later, Jason called to schedule a follow-up meeting. He returned with signed contracts and a deposit check, officially making Martinez Real Estate Solutions a client of Summit Digital Marketing. The project was handled like any other engagement, with my team developing comprehensive solutions while I provided strategic oversight. Jason proved cooperative and appreciative, implementing our recommendations and achieving substantial improvements in his business stability and revenue. The success was professionally satisfying, but it demonstrated how completely my life had changed since that devastating afternoon at Carmen's baby shower. The woman who had once been humiliated by her husband's dismissal of her professional ambitions was now being paid substantial fees to solve business problems that same husband couldn't handle alone. During our final meeting, Jason made one last attempt to address the personal dimensions of our professional relationship. "Emma, seeing what you've accomplished has made me understand how much I underestimated you during our marriage. You were always more capable than I gave you credit." Or, "Thank you for saying that," I replied sincerely. "But I hope you understand that the most important thing isn't whether you support my ambitions now, but whether you've learned to support the ambitions of the people in your current life." As Jason left our offices for the final time as a client, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us full circle. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been entirely worth every risk and sacrifice. I had built something that belonged completely to me, surrounded myself with people who valued my expertise, and created opportunities that expanded rather than constrained my potential. Standing in my office that evening, looking out at the Phoenix skyline, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from proving something important to yourself rather than to anyone else. Summit Digital Marketing had become the foundation for a life that was entirely my own, built on achievements that belonged to me rather than being subordinated to someone else's vision for my future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.